ask for abolition and you come out and you ask for even something as liberal as police reform, right, or any of these things, what you will always be bombarded with is the idea of the good cop, right? There's some cop out there that is just handing out his parking tickets and waving hi to kids and going home, right? That this is what you're, at all points, this is what we're being told. Now, I obviously have like infinite thoughts about this and infinite like snarky comments to make. But if you have any, well, actually, you know what? Before I do that, sorry, Louise. What I do want to raise is all of the names of, not all of the names, obviously, because we'd be here all day, but some of the more recent names of folks that have been killed by cops out here within the South Bay, as early as late last year. A lot of this was during the uprisings and then slightly before. But Kenneth Ross Jr., a brother who was killed, I want to say on a mental health check, right? I believe he was having an experience outside in public. Cop pulls up after being called. They said a man was outside with a gun. If I'm not mistaken, there was no evidence that he had a gun. They show up. The guy has a machine gun like out the window, right? Kills Kenneth Ross Jr. Later, during when he's being interviewed, I can't remember if it was like as part of an investigation or whatever, but on record, the guy is like the cop, I should say, is heard like bragging about shooting him. Like, yeah, like I really took him down or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, right? But like completely no regret whatsoever about what. So always power to Kenneth Ross Jr., who passed in Gardena, if I'm not mistaken, actually at Raleigh Park. Power to Andres Guardado, the guy who was killed, I believe, near Gardena or near Compton. Straight like wild situation. One of those situations where shot in the back like always, right? But yet the cops are claiming that they felt threatened by this teenage boy, right? Mm-hmm. And then also got to raise up Deshaun Kizzy's name, who was killed. I want to say not. It wasn't in Gardena, but it was near Gardena. And I'll never forget that day because I was actually with my partner. We were biking around, having a cool day. And then as soon as I get home, I see that he was pulled over for like some type of biking violation, right? Something as like ridiculous as that, and it results in him getting shot like upwards of 15 times. You know what I mean? And it's that type of stuff that like ruins your whole day, ruins your whole idea of what it's saying. Like I don't even think I've ridden my bike since. Like it's like it takes the fun, it takes the joy out of just like everyday shit like that. But, yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to raise their names before we get into this conversation about the myth, emphasis on myth of good cop.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to take us anywhere from there.
Well, yeah, so this myth of the good cop, we've for sure seen manifest in what we do, where we've attended sweep defenses of encampments, and in one particular, the cops pulled up and they greeted us, right? They had smiles, or smiling through their mask, rather, very, like, quote-unquote friendly, right? Like, and they go in with us, they walk in with us into the encampment, and they greet everyone, they kindly tell everybody, okay, yeah, you have 30 minutes to pack your things and go, and then the rest sanitation's gonna pack up and throw it away, right? So we talk to them about what we need to talk to them at the time being. They walk away, and the folks that we work with at the encampment, they let us know that they have seen those cops before, they have dealt with those cops before, and when we aren't there, those cops are completely different and not nice and not so pleasant to be around. And they don't get 30 minutes usually. They have to go on the spot. So really interesting that, I mean, I don't know. I don't look at myself and think like, wow, like I intimidate a cop. But it's interesting that they decided to be kind when we're there, but then when we're not there, they're completely hostile towards these folks, and their colors really shine when we're not there, and that is appalling.
and this is what I think I try to emphasize with folks, and I want to admit up front that I'm stealing this from Glenn Ford, right? Because Glenn Ford's description of Obama was always the most, like, he is simply the more effective evil. What he meant by that is like all that charm, all that grace, all that smiling, all that, style and being relatable and all that stuff. All that does is make him more effective at what the Republicans would have done to you anyway. It just makes him more effective because you forget that people are being bombed overseas constantly, right? And that civilians are dying at like ridiculous rates, and it makes you forget that he is redefining warfare just like on a day-to-day basis, and we have no idea because we're so caught up in the personality and the propaganda and all these other things. And I think this absolutely applies to the good cop.
Right.
I think the good cop is more dangerous than any other cop, because while you're sitting there, having coffee with these dudes and talking about reform, and they're telling you, yeah, sure, awesome, great, when he gets the call to go displace the houseless person, or go harass some black kid or brown kid on the street corner, what's stopping him aside from that politeness that's wooed you into not paying attention anymore? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you could make an argument that if a cop pulls up to a sweep and there is a large, team or organization there to respond and stop that sweep, that if that cop is behaving erratically, if he's doing things that are well beyond the legal spectrum, and doing all these things, that the chances of stopping the sweep or having consequences for that cop after the sweep are more likely, right? It's filmed, all of these things are documented. But if the cop just shows up with a calm demeanor and just says, hey guys, 30 minutes, you got to get out of here, what has changed? Nothing, right? The person has still been displaced, the harm has still been committed.
Right.
All they did was take away your ability to, perhaps look towards the legal framework for once and actually defend the little guy. And so this is where it's like, what are we getting from the good cop? Is it just more effective? It's just a more effective evil, in my opinion. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And I think when we put this under greater emphasis, like, what does a sweep consist of, right? It's literally displacement of folks. And I think, like, and it's so sad that this is the bar, but when a cop isn't actually physically harming someone, then most people will look at that person and be like, that's a good cop. So, but these people weren't harming us. They weren't physically harming us, right? They weren't physically harming these houseless folks, but they were displacing them. And then later that night, there was a storm. There was a thunderstorm. And so what you're doing is you are subjecting them to worser conditions when you displace them, especially under a storm. And that, as you and I have talked about privately, that in itself is an act of violence, which essentially defeats the whole notion of a good cop, right?
Exactly. That's really what it comes down to. And to kind of open the conversation up beyond just houselessness and, police violence that is committed upon houseless folks, because like I said, some folks just don't care about houseless folks, unfortunately. So to bring it to, outside of that, right? I recently wrote a story about Redondo Beach PD, right? Because they are heavy on reform. Their new chief, I think his name is Kaufman, is very big on reform. And so his whole thing is, hey, we want to have the fundraising events, the parties, the coffee cop situation, sit down, have a donut with us, the community review, all of these pleasantries, right? But what I was writing about specifically about this guy who would fit the model of the good cop, right? Like they do the whole transparency thing. If they have any instances where guns are fired or whatever, they report all these, or at least they claim to report all of them, right? All of the instances of violence. They do all of the things that would fall under the category of good cops. But the story that I was writing about recently is, I want to say either this January, I want to say the January before last, they held a Martin Luther King Day celebration, right? And really all it amounted to is that they were going to have a bench, I think in front of the police department, if I'm not mistaken, with symbols like hope and peace and shit carved into the bench, right? the type of like apolitical kind of just soft punch, stuff that you would expect from people like that. So they had this bench in honor of Martin Luther King, because of course that's what, if I'm not mistaken, that's what he was fighting for, was benches, more benches in the city. I think that speech was about, right? The whole, I have a dream that there would be more benches or something like that. So they put the bench there, and if I'm not mistaken, they fundraised for that bench. This didn't come out of like their budget, that hella inflated budget. I can't even remember the number now, but it's not, it's millions of dollars. They fundraised for it, and out of that, they also had like 2 scholarships, I believe, where they essentially crowdsourced from local students ideas for how they could have more community outreach programs, which sounds harmless in and of itself. But when you think about it this way, what they were really doing was outsourcing labor, particularly cop labor, to children, right? They were saying, hey, how can we be further get our carcerality fingers all in your community, right? How can we have more social programs and all this stuff? So they had kids write this, and then they dole out scholarships. And what you find out if you look close enough is that those scholarships didn't even go to Black children. So it's like, not only did you have scholarships, that you put on the, that you made off of this man's name, this civil rights, leader and all this stuff. You use his name to dole out scholarships to white students, right? Meanwhile, though, what they are using their budget for is for quote unquote badass or most badass motorcycles, right? Like, because they wanted to upgrade their motorcycle.
That's so weird.
This is like straight like on their website. They're like, you don't even have to dig for this stuff. They're proud of it, right? Like, yo, we're spending this money on these new motorcycles because we want it to look cool and badass, and it's like, yo, so you got money for this type of stuff, but then when it comes to pay just lip service to Martin Luther King, we get a bench and some scholarships to some white students.
Right.
Like, this is the best. You know what I'm saying? And I'm leaving out one of the best parts, which is that the whole event was put together by a PR firm called Sands and Shores, which is owned by a Black woman. And so, you ask yourself, why would a police department need to collaborate with a PR firm? And when you think about it even a little bit, it's pretty obvious, which is because, like, why else would, like, if you just look at the deeds of police and what they do, there's no reason to like them. Even if you don't hate them, there's no reason to like them. You know what I mean? There's no reason to be excited about cops. And so what they have to do, what is necessary, is that we be bombarded with propaganda from all ends. There's a reason why Law and Order is one of the longest running shows of all time, or that on most basic cable shows are cop shows in one way or another. It's the CSIs, it's the NCIS or whatever. It's all of these different cop shows just bombarding you over the head. And when you're not looking at that, you're watching the movies, and most of the people in the movies are cops. Or even if you're watching a superhero movie, if you take away those suits and the powers, those are cops. That's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're enforcing laws. They're beating that shit out of like poor people in the streets. I hate to say it, but if you take off, right? We talked about this before. If you take off Batman's costume, that's a cop.
He's also a rich dude beating up like poor folks, which is
exactly. Yeah, he's a billionaire and a cop.
It's strange.
But I'm getting off topic. But I say all this to say that we have to be considering whether or not we're just making more effective cops when we do police reform, when we commit ourselves to police reform. Are we just making better cops? And by better cops, I mean cops that can brutalize us better.
Right.
Because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. That's why you have, police departments associated with LAUSD accepting armored trucks and then having to give those trucks up once the community is like, what are you doing?
Right.
Why do you do that? You know what I mean?
You're right.
This is why you have all of these issues that we're currently having because we keep getting trapped into the idea of like, oh, if we can just give them less lethal weapons, right? Those less lethal weapons that they were shooting us in the face with during protests last year, right? We saw how non-lethal those were when people were catching rubber bullets to the eye. And if I'm not mistaken, it might have been LA Times. I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting this, but I'm pretty sure there was a long story written up. I can't remember by what publication about different people that got, that lost eyes and missing limbs and suffered like body injuries that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. And this is that problem that we're kind of dealing with COVID, not to get too off topic, but right, if you just look at things through death and not death, then you miss that in between, right? Like, sure, we can maybe stop some of the killings, but what happens when people are losing limbs and being traumatized and taking that home to their families? Like, this doesn't just end, because you didn't die.
Right. And there was, sorry to cut you off, but there was also even a young girl, probably around our age, was actually killed in the uprisings last year. Due to, I'll for sure fact check this, but I believe she was shot with a rubber bullet in the head, and she collapsed, and she later passed that day, or maybe the next day. But no, yeah, I totally agree that like the whole less than lethal shit that they give us is totally bullshit. And okay, we're not being killed, but now I don't have an eye, right? Or my friend was killed, whatever. So and
we know this country's track record with disability, so it's like
that
it's not death, but it's close to a death sentence in this country.
Yeah, exactly.
It's absolutely wild, and I don't think it's by chance that when you look at these Democratic ran communities, cities, and states, like when you look in New York and when you look in California, I don't think it's coincident that we have some of the strongest police departments in the world, right? Despite that this is supposed to be the liberal, progressive spaces. And it's because we have committed ourselves to reform, all we've done is allow them to just continuously and routinely get better at what it is that they do, right? Which is to suck in resources from communities and then brutalize those communities more efficiently.
Right.
It's like, do we want to keep recommitting ourselves to the good cop? Because he's getting better. Like, that's the thing. It's like, it's working. The reform is working. They're getting better at what they do.
Right.
What that means is when things like 4118 happen, or when a George Floyd situation happens, or a Kenneth Ross or Andres Guardado or a Deshaun Kizzy, when these things happen, how are we going to respond? If they have all the weapons, if they have all the tools, if they have all of these things, what are our responses going to be? Because we want them to be better.
These reforms just has given them more ammunition, essentially. No pun intended. It's given them more power rather than regulate their power or take some power away. Right? It's the illusion of
it's more ammunition, both literally and metaphorically.
And, exactly.
But also that metaphorically is honestly what I'm more scared of than the actual ammunition. Because if nobody subscribed to the idea of the good cop, then that ammunition only goes as far as it can go. And what I mean by that is, if they kill someone in that scenario, then our communities unite and we organize against them, and it becomes what some people would describe as revolution. But because they have that metaphorical ammunition, which I consider to be one of the most dangerous fruits of that being people's minds, right? Like, the good cop is more there's the good cop that is the human being that is actually outside doing that work and brutalizing the people, and then there's the good cop in people's heads. And to me, that's the scariest thing, because when these things happen, when these moments of brutality happen, when we are losing control of our own communities day by day, it's that idea of the good cop in people's heads that's stopping them from acting. It's when we have these conversations with loved ones and friends and family and whoever, and they can't even take in the information that you're saying, the data and the material conditions in which people live, because they're too busy thinking about the good cop that's been implanted in their brain that actually doesn't exist in the real world.
Yeah. So if you would like to make a donation to a mutual aid organization that Leon and I work with, it's South Bay Community Care. We have a coffee site. I believe it's coffee.com/South Bay Community Care. You can leave a small donation. It all goes to the work, right? We deliver hundreds of meals every weekend to houseless folks. We also build power in our communities.
Yeah, and if you want to just pay it straight up, just hit the Venmo or hit the Cash App. It all should be under South Bay Community Care, if I'm not mistaken. Now, find us online. If you have any doubts, do not finesse yourself and send it to South Bay Community Care or like some like off-brand situation. Like, be careful. But if I'm not mistaken, both of them are South Bay Community Care, Venmo and Cash App.
Yeah, and they'll both be in the description down below. Links will be down there. And, please give us a like, a subscribe. That would really help us to grow an audience. So thank you.